Last session we talked about dreams, and there's much more to talk about in dreams than what we talked about, a lot more. This session we're going to talk about the different kinds of neshamot, the different kinds of souls that there are. My work that I'm taking this from is from Sefer HaGilgulim. It is written by Shmuel Vital, who is the son of Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital was the student of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, that went to live in a part of Israel called Tzfat. And they lived in caves, and they lived in very secluded areas, and they had what was known as hidbodedut, meditation, separation from the general public, and it was quite, the diaries that they keep are eyebrow raisers, very much so. If you have any questions about last week or anything, you can ask them anytime during this. We talked about what a neshama was. A neshama is part of the Almighty. Neshama is part of God Himself. There are a number of kinds of neshamot, of souls, and one kind of neshama is the one that you're born with, and that stays with you, and it suffers all your life. It suffers with you, and it doesn't leave you until you're 120 years or however long you decide you're going to last on this earth. He says here, that many souls, as we said, are mixtures of good and bad. Some come into this world as a Gilgul, as a reincarnate, and some come as what is known as Ibur. Ibur is a Hebrew word that means pregnancy, but it's a type of soul as well, because as opposed to the soul that every person has with him or her the whole life, the Ibur will come to the person for a specific time during that person's life and may leave. Now, this is not so much the same as the concept of dibuk. It is that where a soul attaches itself, but Ibur has a different concept. As I said, the soul, which is the Gilgul, stays with you your entire life, and it suffers all of the pain that a person suffers from the time the person comes out to the world until the person dies, and it has no permission or power to leave until the person dies. But the Ibur is a soul that comes into the person when the person after the person is already alive, and the person is already at least 13 years old, or for a woman 12. In other words, the Ibur cannot come into a person, according to the Kabbalists, until the person is at least 12 for a woman and 13 for a man. Now, there are two possible reasons. There are a number of reasons for the Gilgul. The Gilgul can be the soul reincarnate, which stays with you for your entire life, can be there for a couple of reasons. One, because of the fact that it is missing something and it has to come back, or for the reason that it is there for you in your entire life, to be for your entire life. Or because of the concept of soulmate. And what is the concept of soulmate? That's a very difficult thing to talk about. The concept of soulmate means that the soul splits, and we're talking about Gilgul now, the soul that stays with you your entire life. the soul splits into male and female. And the original soul, the soul of Adam Arishon, of Adam, contained all the souls of the world. But the one particular soul of Adam was split into half, as we told you before. And that soul became Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava. We said it wasn't taken from a rib, he was split in half. Because Adam originally was an androgynous creature. And that is not even Kabbalistic, that's basic biblical literature. From the passages you see, he was an androgynous creature, both male and female. Adam was split into half. According to the mystics, these souls were going to roll until through many different Gilgulim, through different reincarnations, until they join each other again. The problem with soulmate is that, according to the mystics, and this is a very controversial concept, it's controversial. The mystics will say to you that there is nothing wrong with divorce. I don't know if I talked to you about that, did I? That the mystics will say to you that it just means you're closer to your soulmate. One of the more famous stories in biblical literature is the story of David and Bathsheba. And David was king. Bathsheba was married to Uriah Uriah the Hittite, I believe is the way they say it in English. I don't know the English too well, but Uriah Hittite was the husband of Bathsheba. So David felt strongly for Bathsheba, and so he sent Uriah Hittite to the battlefield, and Uriah Hittite was killed. The only problem was that David had relations with Bathsheba before Uriah Hittite was killed. Interestingly enough, the sages of the Talmud tell us, anyone who went out to battle during David's time, did you know this? Wrote a divorce for his wife, so that in case he was lost in battle, there is no statute of limitations on a missing person. I believe the law is 7 years in American law, but there is no statute of limitations. We will believe basic signs, basic evidence and testimony which we would not ordinarily accept in other cases. We do accept in the case of the woman whose husband is lost in battle. For instance, they had these same problems in basically they had the same problems in the time of the gas chamber, where the men and women were separated, and at the separation time, they didn't know what happened. They didn't know what happened to the husbands a lot of times, and because they didn't know what happened to the husbands a lot of times, unfortunately, the rabbis had to really look for real good reasons to let these women get married again, because as I said, there is no statute of limitations. A woman is called an iguna from the word ogen, which means an anchor if her husband is not found. So, in order to circumvent this problem, everybody who was in David's army wrote a divorce to his wife before he went off to battle. The question was, when was the divorce valid? Was it valid retroactively, or in Hebrews we say chal lemafreya, or was it not chal lemafreya, or was it not valid retroactively? What is interesting about this is that the Talmud says, he who assumes that David had sinned because he took somebody else's wife is making a mistake, because it explains, number one, that there was a get that was written, and most commentaries accept the fact that the divorce was chal lemafreya. It was valid retroactively, so that meant that if the husband died, the divorce was in effect from the time that the husband wrote it before he went off to battle. You with me? But not every, so therefore any relationship that David would have had with Bathsheba at that time was that of a single woman, because of the fact that the divorce was retroactively valid, and so therefore there was no problem. But not all the commentaries see it that way. Some commentaries see it that the divorce was not retroactively valid, and it only went into effect from the time that Uriah Hittite died in the battle. That being the case, then you have a serious problem with David and Bathsheba, because the divorce was not valid until afterwards. So the mystics.
Why did they have to argue?
The prophet Natan Hanavi, Nathan, the prophet Nathan. What Marina is alluding to is that the prophet Nathan comes to King David, and he says to him, "Let me ask you a little riddle here. There's a man who had a lot of had many sheep, and he was a wealthy farmer, and then there was this poor man that only had one little sheep, and the wealthy guy with all the sheep came and took the poor man's sheep. What would you say about this wealthy guy that took the poor man's sheep?" So King David says, he should die. Yamut Aish, the man should die. And so, in one of the most dramatic moments in the biblical literature of Tanakh, Natan Hanavi points his finger at David and he says, "Ata Aish, you are the man." And it's really a very, very dramatic moment. At any rate, the mystics come along and say that this whole thing was preordained. Not preordained that she should have Bathsheba, but that the souls of David and Bathsheba were really the reincarnated souls of Adam and Eve. So this cosmically was going to happen. Now there are a lot of implications one could draw from this, and I'm not trying to draw those implications. As I said, this is a very complex issue, the whole concept of soulmate. There was a story once in the rabbinic literature of a man who came to this woman while her husband was away and told her that he was Elijah the prophet, and that he had to spend the night with her, or because of the fact that Messiah had to be born from their relationship. And she believed him. And there was a whole question that came to the rabbi: what do you do about this particular case? So it was an interesting question. But the fact of the matter is what?
What is the case?
The case was there's a couple of problems there. A baby, her relationship with her husband, and then there was a baby born from this whole thing. Well, the baby might have been something else, but that was the whole question. So the issue that came up here, pardon the, but it was what to do. But the fact of the matter is, in this particular case, this was the concept of soulmate. So a soul can come into a person because that soul has done something and has to come back on earth for a certain amount of time and be there for a certain amount of time. Or the soul, because it lacks something in its life. Or the soul can be there because it's there to help the person. Or the soul could be there because it has to meet the soulmate. These are some of the basic concepts of Gilgul. Gilgul is the soul that is in a person from the time that the person is born until the person dies. That's Gilgul. The other kind of soul is the soul called Ibur. Ibur is the soul that is there, that attaches itself for a number of reasons, either for its own reason or for its for the good of the person. Now let me go into some of the. Any questions so far? Okay. Got to read some of these Kleinoisius here. because I want to get this exactly. He says here, the concept of ibor is into two areas. One, that this soul starts from the beginning, or it comes anew to impregnate itself, to cleave to this person for its own sake, because it was missing a certain mitzvah, a certain commandment that it did not fulfill in its previous gilgul, in its previous normal cycle of the neshama. And this is one of the mitzvahs that it could not have done. For instance, the mitzvah of yibum and chalitza. This is a very interesting concept. That it's not there for a reason that it had done something evil. But let's say there are 613 commandments. Now, a person really can't do all the commandments and live a normal life. For instance, there's the mitzvah of yibum, which in English is known as, or you say in Hebrew, I can't take the Hebrew word, yibum. It's just, it doesn't come out good to an American. Yibum. But that's in English called the leveret. The leveret means that if a husband died and left no offspring, so the wife was not free to marry. She was, in essence, her husband's brother would have the right to marry her because of Alo Yimachar Shemo B'Yisrael, because his name shouldn't be erased. So if he didn't have any children, this was the concept of Yibum, if he died. If the husband did not want to marry, or if the brother didn't want to marry the woman, they would have a whole thing where she spits on the floor and tells him off and says this so should be done to the man who doesn't want to build his brother's house. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. The rabbis got together and decided that some brothers-in-law were taking their brothers' wives not for the mitzvah, but for less than altruistic reasons, shall we say. And they decided that automatically there would be an automatic non-yibum system, where, for instance, there would be automatically chalitza. Chalitza is the act of automatically saying, all right, you will not build it, so shall be done to the man that won't build his brother's house. And they have a shoe, and it's the whole incident. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but the fact of the matter is that mitzvah of chalitza is automatic today. The rabbis do not allow a woman to marry her husband's brother in the case where he died and left no children. They don't. So it's an automatic case of chalitza. But interestingly enough, one of the commandments is the mitzvah of chalitza. It's one of the 613. And if you live a normal life, you won't have to do this mitzvah. But some souls, it is necessary for them to perform all the mitzvahs. So therefore, it has to come back for this to happen. You see, the mystic sees death as just it's really not a terrible, terrible thing. In other words, you must do this, you must live. What kind of business that the soul has to come back so that she should marry a man, or the man should marry a woman, and that the husband or the husband or wife should die, or actually it's on the man, that the wife should die so that he should do the mitzvah of chalitza. What do you mean? There's death and there's horror and there's all kinds of things and there's mourning. The mystic death is just a rite of passage. It has no bearing on the ultimate goals of existence. So it thinks totally different. When we lose someone, now it says, but the sages say that the nature of the human being is that stopped, didn't it? The nature of the human being is such that it says ein adam meis el leishto ve'ein ish meis el leishto ve'ein isha meis el labala, which means that nobody feels the death of a person like the spouse, basically. A man only dies for his wife, a woman only dies for her husband. And that is the case. And the Talmud also says, Bakol yesh temura chutz me'eshet ni'urim, that everything is replaceable in this world except the wife of your youth. It may be a romanticized concept in today's world, and that doesn't mean that that's ultimately the best thing. What that means that that's the way human nature is. Bakol yesh temura chutz. That's, you have to understand how that goes and what that means. That doesn't mean necessarily that the best thing for a person is to stay with his Eshet Neurim, to stay with the wife of his youth. But there's something about the love and the feeling and the emotion and the sweetness of the love of youth that cannot be replaced in the world. Whether or not that these couples should stay together is not the issue. Okay?
Or they're just saying that a wife feels her husband's loss.
The rabbis are saying that they feel it more, that the wife feels the loss of a husband more, or the husband feels the loss of a wife more than anyone else, because they consummated a cosmic relationship of souls coming together.
So then they feel that's
they feel it, but that's a difficult loss from the way they feel it, but that in the ultimate is not the purpose of the whole relationship. I'm losing you. What I'm saying is that the rabbi spoke from the mystic spoke from one aspect, and the rabbis, some of who were mystics and some were not, spoke from another. From the point of view of the human feelings, the loss of a spouse is devastating, because that's the nature of flesh and blood, and that has experienced a cosmic relationship of the coming together of a soul. However, in the long run, if the only reason that soul came down to earth was to fix something, tikkun, as we say in Hebrew, to fix something, even though the flesh and blood manifestations of the husband and wife souls feel terrible at the loss, it's not really in the ultimate a reason to mourn, because of the fact that that flesh and blood existence is not the ultimate purpose. So when the rabbis talked about the fact that a husband feels the loss of a wife and the wife feels the loss of a husband, they were talking from a flesh and blood aspect of the nature of human beings. But the ultimate may not have been that. The ultimate may have been that this soul that was lost, as much as a spouse may cry and mourn, this soul is now free to its ultimate destiny, its spiritual destiny. So there's one aspect of how we feel, which is the commentary of Ein Ish Meit Ela L'Ishto.
That's what I'm
Wait, right.
No, that's what I don't, because I don't think that's the ultimate loss. I don't think that's the ultimate hurt, and psychologists today don't either.
Don't think it was the ultimate loss
Of a spouse.
In other words, it's more important. It's more devastating to lose
Right.
An offspring, a child.
That's what I don't.
All right, now that is true.
I hate to keep getting.
No, but what they were saying, and I think you make an excellent point, but what they were saying was that a tragedy, in other words, they say that no one feels the loss of a human being like a spouse. But that is not to say that is the worst feeling that a person can have. Woman A loses a spouse. No one feels the loss of her spouse more than woman A. But still, what? But that doesn't mean that there could not be a more devastating loss in her life, and that would be the loss of a child. True. But in either case, in the eyes of the Kabbalists, this is not a tragedy in the eyes of the Kabbalists, going on spiritual life. And the flesh and blood person has the right to mourn, because they're subject, because God puts them into a flesh and blood existence where these things can happen. Now, yeah. That's the Kabbalist view.
When the bed-
Good questions, by the way. Yeah.
His wife,
Yeah.
the past, will they married more than one?
Right.
Like if you had 1,000 wives,
Yeah.
they would all born like this example, then it is one.
Well, in other words, if a woman was had access to her husband once a month because he had so many wives, that doesn't mean that in every case a woman mourned. There have been cases where women, could you believe it, where women actually murder their husbands. I know it's hard to believe, but there are cases like that. That has happened. Now that doesn't mean automatically that everybody feels that. No, but it means you have to take this that in a good relationship between a husband and a wife, no one's going to feel the loss more than the spouse. In a good relationship, there are exceptions to every rule. Okay.
You can take it just on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
On a day-to-day basis, that a spouse you may feel it because your routine and your life will be changed more than anybody else who comes over and says anything to you. It doesn't mean that much to somebody else, but you yourself will be affected on an everyday level. So how much more can you be hurt? I can agree with that. I can see what that means.
That's what.
Yeah, that is bad. Who else but a husband or a wife that you're with that person every single day? But children can adjust easier.
Nobody knows how anybody's going to react, and you may have a family where a husband or a wife hate each other on a day-to-day basis, and then something happens to one of them, and then all of a sudden, then you have problems.
Worse problems than you had before.
Yeah, but then you have all kinds of problems of guilt, and you have problems of I've always said that the role of a parent is to instill just a little guilt. I'm being facetious, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little guilt. There's nothing wrong with people feeling a little guilt. With a child is a very interesting situation because the Talmud says, "Banim toli b'mazli," that children depend, what you get out of children depend upon luck, or not luck, but the position of the stars and things beyond your control. And a parent who is a bad parent should not pat themselves on the shoulder if a kid goes wrong. A parent who's a good parent should not blame themselves if a kid goes off, because really it's far beyond your control. Anyway, so we were talking about that sometimes an Ibur will come to the world, an Ibur meaning as opposed to a Gilgul, a soul that attaches itself, for the purpose of the person himself, or for its own purpose, and sometimes it will come to help the person. Now, pardon?
So there are two souls in the person?
No, it could be for...
You said it doesn't come until the person's either 12.
Yeah, you could have more than one soul in a person. The Gilgul has got to be there. That's the life force soul.
Right.
But the Ibur can come in either because of its own sake, or because it needs to do something, or to help the person. The words are in Hebrew. O efshar shehi mitaberet im ha'adam letzorech ha'adam atzmo l'sayo u'zakuto u'lahadricho, which means that it comes into the person for the needs of the person himself, to help the person, to give him privileges to do certain things, and to guide him. Certain souls with certain talents. In other words, if a person is a very righteous person, he might be privileged to have the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, come into him to help him over a certain situation. People who had never done things before, all of a sudden rise to the occasion. We've got all kinds of wonderful expressions to make excuses for what is really the concept of Ibur, the concept of another soul coming into a person. So when people rise to the occasion, sometimes a soul attaches itself to the person for their good. Okay. Well, that's Ibur. Ibur is is for a certain amount of time. The life force soul is called a Gilgul. Now the Ibur is also a Gilgul. It rolls, but it's not what is known as a Gilgul.
So it could be for 1 day?
Could be for 1 day, could be for 1 hour, could be till a person dies. But it wasn't there when he was.
So when the soul comes back, it could be either.
A soul could come back as a Gilgul or an Ibur. Right, exactly. But the Gilgul soul has no right, it cannot leave the person. It's there for the whole life and suffers, just as a person suffers humiliation or pain or things, the soul suffers that too.
Can an Ibur soul become a Gilgul soul?
In the next Gilgul, yes. In the next incarnation, yes. Yeah, but it cannot do it while it's there. It can change into a Gilgul, yes, there's no question. All right, okay. The soul which comes for the purpose of the person into whom it came is not lacking anything that it needs to be on this earth. All right. Now there are two kinds of okay. However, the soul that comes into a person to the soul that comes in for the purpose of its own shortcomings, it fills the entire body, say the Kabbalists, and it is like the normal neshama itself, the normal neshama, and it suffers all the pains, the physical and emotional pains of the like the normal soul of a person, and it stays with him until it fulfills through that person's body the mitzvah which it was lacking.
So then that one probably wouldn't come back then.
Once it does that, it leaves. Yeah.
And then would it ever, the souls that come back because they didn't finish something.
That's part of the reason. Now, souls can come back for two reasons: for the purpose of the human being, or for their own purpose. A soul that comes back as a Gilgul and has to stay the entire life of the person, that could be for his own good, or that could be for the lack. Or the Ibur the Ibur is there for a particular reason, particular one mitzvah that is lacking, or what it. In other words, a Gilgul can come back. They can come back for the same reasons, but one is temporary and one is permanent.
Right, but doesn't the soul just come back until it's not going to come back anymore? It comes back
Until it doesn't have to come back anymore, except those particular souls that were granted a mission to help the person.
Oh, that could be a Gilgul also.
That could be a Gilgul also, yes. Gilgul could be for two reasons too.
I have a basic question about soul.
Yeah.
The amount of soul. You're talking about 1 billion people, 1 million people. Is there a predestined number of souls?
Well, the Kabbalists talk about 600,000 initial souls, but these were broken off into sparks into various larger numbers.
So there was subdivision of the
Yeah. There were souls in subdivisions. This is far more deep depth to this, and I'm giving you some basic overviews of it. This is the way the Kabbalists. Now, the soul that comes into a human being for the purpose of helping the human being does not suffer the pains that human being suffered. And whereas the other soul that will come in, the Ibur that comes in for the purpose of its own particular tikkun, its own particular making itself better, that soul leaves the moment it has done what it has to do to make itself better. Then it's gone. All right, I'm out of here. All right, that soul is gone then. However, the soul that comes into a person to help the person, not for the soul's own sake, that soul has no set time until it goes out, but it stays there with its own free will, And if the person who it helps makes his attitudes and actions better, it will stay there. The more a person does good, the more a person does good things in the world, the more that soul, that good soul that's there, cleaves to him. However, if the person does evil, that soul that was there to do good for it and to help it leaves it. No, but it only came there. It's no, but it's the only reason. I'm not going to go into that.
My concept of reading about a dibuk
Yes.
is it always comes out as quote unquote the feeling is that it's an evil force that's in the person that's making the person misbehave or do something that they're not controlling, they're not responsible for their own actions. But from the point of view of the Kabbalists, I would imagine that would go back to your original concept of justice. Because maybe if they're doing it for the Gilgul, then it doesn't have to come out as a good act. It can make the person behave in an evil, quote-unquote, manner because that is what is the justice. That is what he's supposed to be paying back over and over and over again.
Right. Everybody knows about Dibuk more than Ibur, but I haven't mentioned Dibuk, and Dibuk has not been, I've stayed away from it because Dibuk is a special kind of situation. Dibuk is a soul that has lost its way and won't leave and is supposed to be out. Dibuk is a situation where a soul, if a person, let's say someone was married to a woman and he died and she married someone else, and the soul could not get couldn't rest, so the soul attaches itself. When Gershon Sholem writes about this in the Jewish Encyclopedia, he dismisses it as some sort of probably hallucination. A person with either a manic depressive or a person with hallucinatory problems, which he says was people say subscribe to the concept of Dibuk. But we really know very, very little about mental illness and how it relates. We know very little about it. We don't know how to deal with it. We know that some kinds of salts can help certain people. There's something called lithium is a salt, and we have no idea why it works or what it's all about. So we really don't know what. I mean, we know that it works in some ways. We don't really know everything about everything. I told you the story, is a famous story about, and sometimes genius is related. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, genius is related to manic depressives. There was an article in the Times about this. Who was it? All the greats, Michelangelo and Da Vinci, and all of them were manic depressives, and they did all of their great creative work during their manic stages, not high manic stages where people think they can jump off roofs, but like halfway up the manic stage there's an extremely creative time. The famous story is of the father of modern music is a Jew named Gustav Mahler, and Mahler was not always transmitting on the right frequency, and Mahler went to Freud, and they took a long walk down by the river, and Mahler grabbed Freud's arm and he said, "Dr. Freud, I can't take living like this. You've got to help me, cure me, please, Dr. Freud." And Freud said, "Mr. Mahler, I would cure you, but you're such a great composer." You get the point? That the difference between what is, and I'm not speaking as a psychiatrist, and I'm not speaking as a psychologist or a counselor. I'm telling you that we don't know really what it is that causes people to rise to greatness or to write great things or to do great things. And the Kabbalah sees it as a certain talent in the neshama that comes into the person and allows a person to do it. Okay. Now, tonight we have discussed the issues of. Now it's very interesting, and I want to get into something else here. Sometimes the neshama, and I want to talk about the gilgul of the neshama, or the ibur. If a person does a certain mitzvah, says the Arizal, or Isaac Luria, and he does it wonderfully, betachlit hashleimut, the ultimate perfection, he is liable to get the neshama of another person. In other words, if there's a tzaddik in that generation and he does one mitzvah like he should, and another person comes in that generation and he also does that mitzvah like it should be done, like the other person, the soul of that tzaddik will go into him even if both of them are alive. Now that's the other concept of Ibur, or a spark, or of that neshama.
While they're both
Yes,
alive.
yes. In other words, it's very possible in the concept of Ibur that, and I'm reading this right out of Rabbi Isaac Luria in the Hebrew, pardon me, I don't want to even get a translation, because this is very exacting kinds of things. So it's possible that the soul of a person who's a great tzaddik, a great righteous person, and then there's this other person who's not a righteous person, he just does one mitzvah so fantastically that soul will go into him, to a portion of that soul.
So this tzaddik would not be diminished by that.
No. And it's interesting, the world, interesting here, and this is the secret of the concept of the relationship between Jonathan and David in the Bible. Jonathan and David and Yonatan. It says, Vatidbak nafsho. It says, Vatidbak nafsho nefesh Yonatan b'David, that the soul of Jonathan cleaved to David. Now, the story of Jonathan and David was a very interesting story. The relationship between Jonathan and David was fascinating, and it's been the subject of much history and much psychiatric writing, and it really has to do with an incredible thing. David started off as a shepherd boy, and it's an incredible story in the Bible. David, the life of David, is the life of Even Moasu Habonim Haitala Rosh Pina, which means the stone that the builders cast aside became the cornerstone. It is the story, basically, of so many biblical heroes. David is a simple shepherd boy, and his brothers are in Saul's army, and Goliath comes along, and everybody's afraid to face him, and David says, I'll face him, and he takes his slingshot and he kills him. So David all of a sudden rises into the kingship, and David becomes one of Saul's favorites. It's where David would play the harp. David is this real complex person. He loves to sing and to write beautiful things, and yet there is in him as well the warrior. And it's really an incredible thing. The most complex person of the entire Bible, without any doubt, is David. Because the Talmud says, "Is safra lav saifa, v'is saifa lav safra," which means if you're a swordsman, you're not a scribe. If you're a scribe, you're not a swordsman. In other words, you cannot be a warrior and a poet. And yet David was both warrior and poet. I think the greatest thing that anybody can say about a person when they live through life is that they're safra and saifa. When Meir Kahana died, Rabbi Bamzer at his funeral said he was both Safra and Saifa. He was a swordsman and a scribe. He could do both. But of course, some of you leftist Israelis have no use for Kahana. But listen, we understand you. I mean, where else but in Israel could Yasser Arafat claims he's going to make a jihad holy war on take Jerusalem back, and then Rabin says believes him. He says, "Oh, I was only kidding when I said that in Cairo." In other words, I was only kidding. But Jews will believe lots of things, even Yitzhak Rabin. Anyway, now that I've got off that topic, but the fact of the matter is, to be Safra and Saifa, I made her mad. To be Safra and Saifa, to be both scribe and poet, is a beautiful thing. And David was that. Let me say one word about David. David was a shepherd boy. He wrote beautiful poetry, and God took him and he made him into a warrior, and he fought. And David all he wanted, he used to say, Chishavti yamim mikedem, shnot olamim. I used to ponder the old-time days. Eskara neginati balayla. I remember I used to sing at night as a shepherd. Im levavi asicha. I spoke with my heart. Vayechapes ruchi, and my spirit was searching. In other words, all this power and this kingship, he never wanted it. He wanted to write poetry, and he wanted to sing and to be spiritual. And God thrust him into this arena of battle. And in the end of his life, David wants to do more than anything else. He said, God is in a simple house, Anochi Yoshevet Beveit Arazim, and I am in this beautiful king house. I want to build the temple. I can't stand it that God is in such a simple house in his spirit, and I'm in this temple. And he wants to build a temple. And God says to him, you can't, you have blood on your hands. You can't build that temple. You can't do it. Now, David, you know how devastating that was to David? How devastating. He could have said to God, did I ask to be a warrior? Did I ask to have blood on my hands? Did I ask for this? I was a shepherd boy. I sang. I wrote beautiful Tehillim. I wrote psalms, and I wrote Mizmarim, and I wrote songs. And you took me and you made me into a warrior, and you made me fight. And now that I want to build a temple to you, you say, no, I have blood on my hands. I'm too much of a street guy. I can't do it. Who has to be that? That's the complexity of King David. That's the complexity of the. He didn't say that, but one could have thought that he would have said something like that. Very, very easily thought that he could have said something like that. At any rate, the relationship between David and Jonathan is extremely complex too. And why? Because David here is this young man who defeats Goliath, and he's brought into Saul's house. Saul is a very interesting character. Saul is very tall. Mishichmo v'mala gavor mikalam. From the shoulders up, he was the tallest. But Saul is nechba ala kelim. He's the way he described. He hides among the furniture. In other words, he's not a public person. He didn't want this either. He didn't want this. Moses didn't want to go to Egypt. Saul didn't want to be king. David wanted to stay a shepherd. Who needs it? Who needs all this business? It's the interesting concept. So Saul is nechbal kelim, and Saul is thrust into this position, and he's not comfortable here. And Saul finds this guy, this David, and he's a warrior, and so he's good for me, right? Then all of a sudden, the women used to start singing. The girls are singing, Hika David. That's right. That Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his tens of thousands. And then all of a sudden, the king and all of his insecurities come right down on him. The Nechbal Akelim, the guy that never was a public figure, Saul, he's going, what is this? All of a sudden, I take this guy in, and now they're saying he's greater than me? What kind of business is this? And all of his insecurities. And then he's filled with the whole concept of Ruach Ra, which we don't know what it means. It probably meant, there it meant manic depressive. There it meant he really was in a depressive state. And David is playing, and all of a sudden Saul is going very nice, and he grabs a spear and throws it at him, tries to kill him. And he has to run away. So now you have this situation where Saul is out to kill David. And Saul, because all of his insecurities and all of his problems are there. So as he's out to kill him, the person who is supposed to inherit the throne is Jonathan, the son of Saul. Now you'll see how your kid's name and the complexity of the name. Now, Jonathan is supposed to inherit. So if I was Jonathan, what would I do? I would say, get this kid and hang him from the highest tree. He's out to get what's mine, right? No. Jonathan, the plot thickens. You know the Bible doesn't let you get off that easy with such a simple plot. That's not what happened. Jonathan and David are friends. And Jonathan, when David is hiding out from Jonathan's father, Jonathan's helping him. So the wild thing here is that Saul finds out he can't understand it. My son is helping my enemy. He is helping sow the seeds of his own destruction. Right? So the Kabbalists and the Kabbalists won't leave this alone. You know that. If this is too good, this is too juicy. And the Kabbalists say where it says "Vatidbak nafsho," nefesh Yonatan b'David, that the soul of Jonathan cleaved to the soul of David. So the Kabbalists say that the soul of Jonathan, a part of the soul of Jonathan, went into David. All right. In other words, in other words, that's what happened. Vatidbak nefesh Yonatan b'David. His soul went into David. So that there was an ibur. That ibur concept went from Jonathan to David. Now, in the end, and you see how the filth of society takes this beautiful story, this Kabbalistic story of how the soul goes through, and when Jonathan dies, David says those famous words, "Nifleit ahavatcha." Yeah, well, you remember the right ones, right? You remember the good ones. Nifleit ahavatcha li me'avat nashim. My love for you, David says of Jonathan, my love for you is greater than my love of women. Of course, the Freudians come along and say, this is definitely a gay relationship here. And if you look at Michelangelo's David in Rome, you do not see the picture of a linebacker for the New York Jets. What? Florence? In Florence, pardon me. But you do not see that of it. You see a very feminine-looking David, as a matter of fact, which is very interesting. But that is not the way the mystics see it. The mystics see it as Vatidbak nafsho, that Jonathan's soul went into David. It became an ibur. It became a cleaving soul. Totally different than the way the world sees it. Totally different. Yes.
No, I didn't went into him.
No, while they were alive. While they were alive. That is interesting. Yeah. So that is how. And let me give you the exact words of what he's saying here. That ibur can be when both of them are alive. All right. And he says over here, I don't see how. Vatidbak nefesh Yonatan b'David, the soul of Yonatan went into David. That's a very interesting thing, how this happens. But this is one of the concepts of ibur. Who was the tzaddik and who was the normal person? That's a very interesting reason. All right, let me finish by giving you a couple of concepts of dream. All right, before we end, and you asked for symbols in dreams. Okay, I'm going to go another couple of minutes. Here are some symbols in dreams. Oh boy. If one sees a reed in a dream, he may hope for wisdom. If he sees several reeds, he may hope for understanding. A pumpkin, a palm heart, and a reed are all auspicious in a dream. It has been taught pumpkins are shown in a dream only to one who fears heaven with all his might. Now, obviously, when the rabbi said this, they weren't talking about pumpkins necessarily and palm hearts. I think there's great allusions in this, too. Maybe our rabbis have taught there are 5 sayings in connection with an ox in a dream. If one dreams that he eats of his flesh, he will become rich. If that an ox has gored him, he will have sons that will contend together in the study of Torah, which is good. If that an ox bit him, sufferings will come upon him. If that he kicked him, he will go on a long journey. There is if one sees a goat in his dream, he will have a blessed year. Obviously, these people came from a highly agrarian society. What?
What about
A lot of farmers. What? If one sees Rockland County in his dreams, he should leave for Israel immediately. No. It's going to make me, next time I have on my program, no, I'm only kidding. I love it here in Rockland County. Okay. If one sees Orange and Rockland in his dream, he will become poor immediately. All right, anyway. All kinds of drink are a good sign of a dream except wine. One may drink it and it turns out well, and one may drink it and it turns out ill. For a scholar, it is always good. Our rabbis have taught that there are three kings who are significant in a dream. If one sees David in a dream, he may hope for piety. If Shlomo, he may hope for wisdom. If Achav, let him fear punishment. All right. These are some of the. I'm not going to go into all of them because if one dreams he is tearing his garments, his evil decree will be rent. If one dreams that he is standing naked, if in Babylon he will remain sinless, if in the land of Israel he will be naked of pious deeds. This is an interesting one. If one dreams that he has been arrested by the police, protection will be offered him. If he has been placed in neck chains, additional protection will be afforded him. This is only if he dreams of neck chains, not of mere rope. Anyway, obviously, all these things require a poter chalom, one who explains dreams. What I have touched upon in this group so far is basically just the outer edges of Kabbalah and mysticism, not into the more. You can't do it in an hour once a week. It's impossible. People don't devote all of their lives to it. Not everyone sees everything that is in Kabbalah as the living end. Some people, some authorities challenge the literal meaning of some of the things. What I've been trying to give you, and what we will continue to do, is an overview of many of these concepts. Are there any questions before we go, or anything anybody wants to ask me? Okay.
This is JMC, the Jewish Media Channel.